Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ayobami Adedine, and I'm the founder of Energy Intelligence. Today, I have with me the pleasure of Mr. Weert Börner, the Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany and Lagos, Nigeria, who is going to be speaking with us on Germany's energy policy and climate change and how it relates to Nigeria's sustainable development. Happy to have you here. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Yes. Thank you so much for this opportunity. One thing I like to know first is what is going on in Germany, particularly when it comes to renewable energy.
Sure. Concerning our so-called energy transition, it has been quite a long story meanwhile, because we started towards the end of the 90s and then with even more power and energy in this sense since 2000 to implement a broader energy transition, meaning to distance our big economy from fossil fuels, especially from coal, to reduce the share of coal, to reduce emissions and build up renewable energies. But for the beginning, maybe let me make a kind of broader picture, because we're not just focusing on the energy sector to reduce CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions. And I think it's rather the normal case for most of the countries in the world that the major source of CO2 emissions is the energy sector. So therefore there is a specific focus on it. But there is also the building and construction sector in Germany playing a big role, because we have a long cold winter. So heating is consuming also a lot of energy, and when the sources are fossil, then again it's a lot of emissions. So if you heat your own apartment or house with oil or coal or gas, you have a lot of fossil emissions that are damaging our atmosphere and contributing to climate change. And then the third important sector is the transport sector. If you look at Europe on the map, then you see that Germany is surrounded by 9 other European countries, and most of the cross-border traffic in Europe is kind of going through Germany. You know, when a truck has agricultural goods transporting them from Poland to Spain, which is quite a normal case in the European Union, because there are no real borders in the sense of customs, etc., then it's a lot of transport energy that you need and a lot of emissions when this truck is running on diesel. So we have a huge change that is going on, meaning that this energy transition in Germany is a big process or work in progress, meaning we started more than 2 decades ago, but we are still kind of somewhere in the middle. Just to give you a number, in the 1990s, both Germany and most of the other member states of the European Union started to decouple, for climate protection reasons and also for better economic growth and efficiency, to decouple the economic growth from the CO2 emissions. Meaning you have more and more or ongoing economic growth, which is a line going upwards, let's say sometimes 3%, sometimes 2%, whatever the GDP growth is per year, but you have a declining line in the graphic since the 1990s of CO2 emissions. And then the political goal has been recently decided by our government, but also supported by the whole society, that we reach the so-called net zero emission line in 2045 already. That's a very ambitious goal, but as I said, we have the experience from the past that a lot is possible. When we started our energy transition, many people argued we will never make it in CO2 reduction, in such a big economy with so much manufacturing, etc. After these more than 20 years of energy transition, we have about 2 million energy producers in Germany, decentralizing from 300 big utilities in one generation to 2 million energy producers, because every farmer, for example, having 5 wind turbines in his backyard, so to say, or somebody having constructed a solar energy plant on his or her land, on the factory roof, whatever, feeding something into the grid is an energy producer. And you may know this game, so to say, with energy production and energy consumption. You have producers, you have consumers, you have prosumers. They produce on the one hand, they consume on the other hand, depending maybe with solar energy on the weather, or with wind also on the weather. Some days you're consuming more than you produce. On other days, right? This farmer, famous German farmer with his wind turbines for wind energy production in the back on his land. He may have certain days in the year where he is much more producing than needing.
Germany has a long-standing relationship with Nigeria, especially after the world wars and all of that. Now, I want to know, are there any initiatives or projects that Germany is currently running in Nigeria to aid the sustainable development of the country?
Well, actually, I would argue that some of the kind of worldwide known private companies that came to Nigeria, especially after independence or in the 60s and 70s, that they already had some of those issues in their mind. For example, Siemens or Julius Berger, in construction, trying to be as resource efficient as possible, and also, of course, bringing good quality in their products, but also in their construction sites to Nigeria. Officially, the German government, of course, had political relations, economic relations with Nigeria, but then really giving energy policy focus started maybe rather late, but in 2011, as at that time Germany, the German federal government, together with the Nigerian federal government, co-opened a so-called energy partnership, meaning that you have a certain focus on energy issues and try to really, despite the big distance between Central Europe and West Africa, to develop some cooperation paths in modernizing also the Nigerian infrastructure. Under this umbrella, so to say, we also pushed for some energy programs in our development cooperation, meaning, for example, that GIZ, or International Development Agency, started also with some government-funded energy programs in Nigeria. Partly it is connected to skills training, capacity building, vocational training, that young Nigerians learn more about different energy sources, how to handle renewables, for example, how to install a solar energy or wind energy plant, or also how to be more energy efficient. And part of this kind of advocacy and also consulting also went and still goes directly to Nigerian companies. So there is a kind of network of German and Nigerian companies working on the modernization of Nigeria's energy infrastructure, and also for trying to start to install more solar energy. Just to give you one concrete example, Daystar Solar Power is a Nigerian company, but founded by 2 Germans. So it's in that sense also a German-Nigerian private direct cooperation. And at least one of these 2 Germans is living in Nigeria all the time and has been building up this solar company, working together also with other Nigerian and German companies. Also co-founded by those people who founded the solar energy business. They are importing German forklifts. Yeah.
Okay.
forklifts that you need for big warehouses and big companies, who have that have their big sites for their internal logistics. So they introduced, meanwhile, about 300 e-forklifts, running on batteries, which means when you have a solar installation as a Nigerian company in your backyard or on your factory site that is producing at least the energy those forklifts need, then you load them overnight, and all day these forklifts are driving around emission-free, when it's from solar energy, 100% emission-free, and contribute to both to the reduction of energy costs for the factory and also to reduce emissions.
I want to delve into Nigeria's renewable energy space. Based on your experience as an energy policy and climate change expert, right? Where do you see Nigeria's renewable energy industry in the next few years? I remember you just mentioned data power and all now. So what is the role of this private and government, and then what is your forecast?
Let me first emphasize that I myself, as a German diplomat now living in Nigeria, I can fully understand that the Nigerian perspective, of course, has been concentrating on their own resources originally. I mean, oil and gas is a Nigerian resource. So I can fully understand that Nigeria still is wondering how can we use it, for our own development. And you may know, for example, right now, especially because of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, Europe got into a new energy source problem because a lot of gas for Western Europe, Central Europe, was coming from Russia. And we had to change sources. And for example, Nigerian gas is going to Spain and Portugal. So you are exporting something of replacing sources for Europe. And I'm sure that's still a matter of negotiations, what can be used there, also coming from Nigeria, as we will not have a chance to move to only renewables that quickly. So we need gas as a kind of bridging source, and this will take some time to even reduce, the gas consumption in Europe. But the most important point today is, I think, also for a country such as Nigeria with fossil fuel sources, that the use of renewables is actually the cheapest way, and also in other criteria, the best way, not just to change, to protect the climate at the end or on the way, but also to have a much better, much more modern economic infrastructure, energy infrastructure in your own country. And I'm sure that Nigeria, that's also what experts, be they Nigerian or foreign, what they tell us. Nigeria has a huge potential in solar energy and also some potential in wind energy, depending on specific regions and wind speed in these regions. There is also a certain potential to use biomass as energy source, and you have some hydropower, of course, traditional hydropower. And then there is the future story, so to say, of hydrogen, where also Nigeria could play an important role. And so we have a whole range of renewable energy sources with a high potential in Nigeria. So I think the urgent matter today is that Nigeria builds them up, meaning you have to install a lot of these renewable energy sources, and you need the the infrastructure, of course, also to develop renewables fast. And there, I think there is a lot of homework, so to say, on the Nigerian side, because, for example, if the roads are bad, it's very difficult to transport solar cell installations or even the much bigger, wind turbine blades, etc. You need transport infrastructure, and of course you need financing. You need investors, be they Nigerian or foreign, who pay for the investment in renewable energies. But I'm sure there is a lot ongoing already, private companies are very eager also to invest in Nigeria. And then we are very hopeful that the new Nigerian government will also promote this course. And I'm not arguing that you should just leave aside all your gas, but I'm sure it's also to the big advantage of Nigeria if Nigeria gets much faster in building up renewables and producing their own energy with renewable sources. And then, of course, you have the other big issue, the grid infrastructure. Right? And there Germany is already involved, partly with political and government funding, but also with private companies like Siemens Energy, trying to cooperate with Nigeria in improving the grid system in Nigeria, so that you have reliable sources of energy, including renewables, and also get the energy, the electricity to where it's needed.
Okay, great. You've talked about the private sector's role in advancing sustainable energy. Now, I want us to move to the government-to-government relationship. What does international cooperation play in this advancement, and then how can Nigeria and Germany work together?
Well, we have this energy partnership that started in 2011, promoting certain programs for the education sector, vocational training, for financing energy projects, modernization of the energy sector with public funding, etc. And to stay with this bilateral approach, we try to, for example, get Nigerian experts to Germany to have a look at our energy transition, to understand what you can change and modernize, whether it's in a country like Germany, with a long winter, or in a tropical country like Nigeria, how to work best on the buildup of renewables. One important point I want to mention that's also important for public financing: to produce 1 kilowatt hour of solar energy today is much more cheaper than 10, 15, 20 years ago. Right? So when the German state was actually subsidizing, the buildup of solar energy, for example, and wind energy in the beginning, the price per unit, be it Naira or Euro cent per kilowatt hour, was much, much higher than today. Right? And today, if you look at it not at ecological, not at environmental terms, but economic terms, solar and onshore wind are the cheapest energy sources you can have, because the price per unit went down, I think, more than 70% or so compared to 10, 15 years ago. So whether it's the state or a private company investing now in Nigeria, the price is much lower already. Now, the other big approach, I would argue, is the international approach, meaning Germany is a member of the G7 and of the G20. If you look at the global scale, in the G20 you have South Africa, as African voice, so to say, not Nigeria, not yet, I would argue. You have, for example, another important initiative actually started by Germany as G20 presidency in 2017. That's the so-called Compact with Africa. It's a public political approach to promote private investment inter alia for climate law, even with a focus on climate protection and energy transition. Right? And we are trying to lobby Nigeria to become part of it. There are, I think, 13, 14 sub-Saharan African countries are already members of this Compact with Africa, but Nigeria would be a very important stakeholder in it for its sheer size, but also for the potential in both still, gas as bridging source, but then the potential for solar, wind, biomass. So this is something we are trying to foster via international channels. And
when I read those books, particularly the third one I mentioned, I know it really inspired me. I saw some new technologies, both that uses electric, using solar panels, all those interesting innovation, and since then it's been in my mind, and it shows is that that's the foundation of why I started energy intelligence, that particular. Okay, now I'm sure that since then, between then and now, there are new innovations when it comes to renewable energy in Germany in particular. So can you list some of those new innovations, and then how can Nigeria be, a part of this innovation?
Well, one point I already mentioned, that we were able, not just Germany, that the leading, I would argue, the leading countries originally in building up renewables are European countries like Denmark, Sweden, Germany, Spain. And altogether, we were able to have this effect that prices have been going down per unit, right? So you need much less investment for using wind or solar energy. But then we have actually a big science and business sector also working on other solutions that is partly it's connected to agriculture, how to reduce emissions in agriculture and also get energy out of so-called agricultural waste. And that's a big issue also for this whole hydrogen issue that is coming up. Actually, in this case, Germany was clever enough to realize Nigeria may be a big country for it. And we opened a so-called hydrogen office in Abuja already, I think, in 2021 or so. Still, recently, but it's there already, doing a lot of networking and consultation to get European and Nigerian stakeholders together for the future hydrogen system, be it green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, whatever you have to reduce emissions, which is still also for Germany a new development, right? There is no, not like in solar and wind and biomass, we don't have our own hydrogen sector that is already built up yet. So this is a new part of it in progress. And then actually another very important part of it where I know of some really new innovations in Germany is the whole resource efficiency and recycling part of both the energy but also other industrial sectors, where again you can save a lot of emissions by reusing, and recycling. And there, just to give you one example, meanwhile, because we had this energy transition going on since the 90s, we have the first wind turbine blades, these huge parts that can't work anymore. So we have to take them down, they get dangerous after 30 years or so. What do you do with them? We had a small German company developing a patent on recycling those wind turbine blades by developing an industrial process which cuts them into small parts, and mixes them then for construction purposes. So instead, for example, of using a lot of sand for building a road, under the cover, right, you can use this new product coming out of recycled wind turbine blades. And you save a lot of energy on another side, on another end. You may know sand is also, meanwhile, a limited commodity around the world, construction sand. You have 7% of worldwide emissions are from concrete, from producing cement, from producing concrete with cement. So you can reduce some at this front by innovative solutions, recycling certain things. It's the same with all of the still oil-based plastic industry, right? It's oil-based, so it can't be good for the environment. So you have to find solutions for having similar products, plastic, but coming from natural sources, natural fibers, etc. And there, I think Germany is one of the innovative countries, also replacing plastic in a lot of products, from letter envelopes to benches in public parks or so from oil-based plastic to totally different sources of producing them. So I would argue, besides the energy sector in a narrow sense, this whole recycling and resource efficiency sector is another important part. Germany is contributing to the CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions. And then maybe the last I would mention is the whole matter of battery and storage science, because it still has to be developed much better. There also, I think Germany is at the forefront with some pilot projects, where you kind of, for example, from renewables, you get the energy, but you can use it immediately. Yeah?
Okay.
You have the wind blowing in northern Germany, you are overproducing energy. Or electricity, how do you store it? Let's say, for example, at least for a night, and in the morning you feed it into the grid for all the factories starting or the harbor in Hamburg working over, mainly during the day. And there we're trying to find solutions for storage. I know one project in Hamburg where we have a big hall filled with kind of volcanic stones that can keep the heat, so to say, from solar or wind energy for a couple of hours. So you have a chance to slow down, so to say, because you don't need it now, you need it 6 hours later. Yeah? So all these issues of storage are so important, and then of course the battery development, because for storage in general, but especially also for e-mobility, because it doesn't make sense you burn oil, diesel or gas, and then have an electric car. The only really emission-reducing way is to have renewables feeding the e-mobility, whether it's a public bus, like I think Lagos state governments announced they want to have the first e-buses driving around. German companies, I mentioned the forklifts, DHL, another big German company, will introduce a new fleet of motorcycles for courier services that is e-based, so electric motorcycles, and of course they need then the batteries have to be reloaded with renewable energy, and that's the only circle that makes sense. And there is a lot of science, research and development going on. German scientists, German companies are very much involved. Some already with Nigerian partners, so it's not, we don't start at zero, but there I see a lot of good potential for more German-Nigerian cooperation.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. So finally, is there anything you want to add within the next 1 minute? Anything you think that maybe I should have asked you want to ask me?
Well, I think this energy transition is always also a matter of convincing your own public, right? And I'm sure that in Nigeria, many of these issues have not been discussed already for years, like in Germany. So I'm very happy that your channel, your magazine, is promoting this. And as you mentioned, you got some booklets a couple of years ago. I have to have at least one new booklet for you. It's a totally new edition of a travel guide through Germany based on renewable energy projects,